The morning light filtered through the smoked-glass windows of Halberton and Company, casting long streaks of gold across the sleek marble lobby. The building smelled of lemon polish and ambition. Employees in crisp suits hustled through security, coffee in one hand, determination in the other. Among them moved a woman who didn't quite fit the mold. She wore a gray cardigan, slacks that had seen better days, and sensible sneakers. A simple badge hung from her neck, identifying her only as T. Jacobs, admin temp. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes missed nothing. She took the elevator up to the 22nd floor, the heart of Halberton's wealth management division. The air there was heavier. It carried the scent of money, condescension, and something sour underneath. The receptionist barely glanced up before directing her down the corridor. "Desk 22C," she said flatly. "Just do what Mr. Caro says and don't touch anything on his desk." T. Jacobs gave a quiet nod and walked down the corridor. She passed offices with panoramic city views, glass-walled meeting rooms filled with men in blue suits and Bluetooth earpieces, and assistants typing like their lives depended on it. At the end of the hall, a voice pierced through the silence. "Hey, you the new temp?" She turned. Standing in front of a massive desk cluttered with papers and half-drunk coffee cups was a tall, broad-shouldered man with slick-back blonde hair and an expensive watch that practically screamed old money. "I'm Timothy Caro," he said, barely looking at her. "You're late. The reports of the Mellon account should have been printed and stapled by now. Do I need to explain what a stapler is?" There was a beat of silence. "No, sir," she replied evenly. "Sir," he chuckled. "That's adorable." He glanced at her badge. "Jacobs, huh?" "Yeah. Just do your job, don't talk to the clients, and stay out of the executive kitchen. It's not for temps." He didn't need to finish the sentence. She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him for a second too long. Not in defiance, in observation. Caro didn't notice. He'd already turned his attention back to barking at a junior banker about decimal placements. For the next few hours, she quietly watched the floor from her modest cubicle. Watched how Caro cut people off mid-sentence, how he mocked accents behind closed doors, how he asked the only black analyst if she was from Brooklyn or Compton, as if that were a joke. He never touched her directly again that day, but every command was laced with thinly veiled disdain. He called her sweetheart when barking orders, never made eye contact, and once handed her his empty coffee cup without a word, like she was invisible. By lunchtime, she'd gathered more than enough. In the break room, a group of junior staff were quietly venting. "He talks about diversity hires like it's a punchline," one whispered, "and HR just shrugs. He brings in the big clients. Untouchable. Remember when he said Tanisha had urban flair?" "I almost choked," another said. The new temp remained silent in the corner, eating her sandwich slowly, thoughtfully. One of them finally noticed her. "You're new, right?" "Sorry, we're just venting. It's kind of toxic around here." She smiled. "I noticed." That afternoon, something shifted. A memo was circulated, a surprise internal audit by an unnamed third-party team, authorized by the board. Whispers buzzed. Caro scoffed loudly. "Let them look," he told his assistant. "There's nothing they'll find on me." But he didn't know that the woman sitting 2 cubicles down had once stood in front of shareholders and moved markets with a single sentence. He didn't know she was Tiana Jacobs, the founder and CEO of Jacobs Equity Group, the firm that had quietly acquired a 51% stake in Halberton and Company only a month earlier. And she had come not to be served, but to see, to feel the culture from the inside out. And Caro? He had just shown her everything. That evening, after the office emptied and only the hum of vac remained, Tiana stepped into the executive suite on the 42nd floor, this time in a fitted black blazer, heel that echoed power with each step and a security clearance that opened every door. She looked down at the client portfolios, at the HR complaints buried in a file labeled non-issues, at the email thread where Caro had joked about babysitting temp trash. Her lips curled, not in anger, in resolve. Tomorrow would be very different. The next morning began like any other. The espresso machine hissed, phones rang off their hooks, and Caro strutted to the office as if he owned the building. He wore a deep navy suit and a smirk that could cut glass. But something was off. Whispers clung to the air. People glanced at emails twice, checked the conference room schedule again. Carol barely noticed. His ego made him invincible, or so he thought. At 10:02 a.m., his assistant rushed in. "Mr. Carroll, you've been summoned to a compliance review. Board level." He blinked. "What? Why?" "They didn't say, but it's happening now. 42nd floor, executive conference suite." His eyebrow furrowed. That floor was reserved for partners, board members, and VIPs. He adjusted his tie and straightened his shoulders. Probably just a formality. Maybe they were impressed with his numbers, finally about to offer him that promotion he'd been angling for. He grabbed his laptop and swaggered toward the elevator. Meanwhile, on the floor below, Tiana Jacobs, now in full CEO form, stood with her executive assistant, reviewing documents. Her afro was shaped to perfection. Her tailored charcoal suit exuded command. Gone was the quiet temp in sneakers. Now, she was every bit the mogul who had outmaneuvered billionaires in the boardroom. "Everything's ready?" she asked. Her assistant nodded. All files, incident reports, internal reviews, compiled. "Ours here. Legal too." Tiana's eyes narrowed. "Good. Let's begin." Back in the elevator, Caro checked his reflection in the chrome door, flashed his best confident smile. He rehearsed a few lines in his head. He was ready for anything, until the door slid open, and he stepped into a room full of suits, folders, and stony expressions. At the head of the table sat a woman he didn't recognize at first, until she stood. "Mr. Caro," she said, "please, have a seat." He froze. That voice, that face. His eyes widened. "You," he said, incredulous. "You." "Tiana Jacobs," she said, extending her hand like it was a formality. "Chief Executive Officer, Jacobs Equity Group. We acquired majority ownership of Halberton last quarter. You may have missed a memo." He couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but only a small noise came out, something between a grunt and a gasp. Tiana sat calmly, folded her hands. "I spent 3 days on your floor. Do you know how many policy violations I witnessed?" Caro tried to recover. I wasn't aware. I didn't know." "That I was watching," she finished. "Exactly. That was the point." One of the legal representatives slid a thick folder across the table. "We've documented multiple instances of racial and gender-based bias, a toxic leadership style, HR suppression of formal complaints, and misuse of client access credentials." Caro's face turned crimson. "Those are exaggerations. Office banter. And I brought in more revenue this quarter than any other team." "This isn't about numbers," Tiana cut in sharply. "This is about culture. And what you've cultivated under your leadership is rot." He stood suddenly. "You can't just walk in and—" "I can," she interrupted. "And I have. I don't make a habit of micromanaging middle management, Mr. Caro. But I do believe in rooting out people who poison the well from within. And what you've done is not only unethical, it's embarrassing." There was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then she said 3 words that ended it all. "You're being terminated." Caro's knees buckled slightly. "Wait! No. Please. I didn't know. Had I known who you were." Tiana leaned forward. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp as knives. "And that," she said, "is exactly the problem." She stood, gathering her tablet. "Clean out your office. Security will escort you out." Caro opened his mouth again, but this time nothing came. No slick comeback. No arrogant scoff. Only the sound of his downfall echoing in his ears. Downstairs, the news spread like wildfire. A security team entered the 22nd floor and walked directly to Caro's office. Staff stopped in their tracks. Even the receptionist stood up, eyes wide. When Caro emerged, red-faced, silent, with a cardboard box in his hands, the entire floor froze. He didn't look at anyone. He couldn't. As he passed the cubicles, he met one familiar face, Tanisha, the analyst he'd once mocked. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at him and said, "About time." Tiana watched it all from the side office window. She wasn't smiling. Not exactly, but the glint in her eyes said more than words ever could. She turned to her assistant. Next step, she said calmly, let's rebuild this floor right, from the inside out. And just like that, the culture started to change. The 22nd floor felt lighter. Without Caro barking insults or slamming doors, people stood a little straighter. Jokes floated across desks without tension. Even the coffee tasted better. But the silence he left behind, it wasn't empty. It whispered, and those whispers were growing sharper. Tiana Jacobs returned to the floor the next morning, this time dressed casually again. No blazer, no heels. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She was trying to make a change. Let's start from scratch, she told the floor in a brief morning huddle. You've all endured a culture of fear. That ends now. We're rebuilding, from empathy, from equity, and from excellence. Applause followed, soft at first, then stronger. Tanisha smiled, as did several junior analysts. Even the receptionist from the lobby, Lauren, clapped with visible relief. But not all hands joined in. One man stayed seated. Malcolm Breen, late 40s, VP of Client Strategy, sharp dresser, polished speaker, always knew which side of the room to stand on. He'd worked closely with Caro for years, though he was too clever to leave a trace. When the clapping faded, Malcolm leaned back in his chair. Very moving, Ms. Jacobs, he said, voice smooth as glass, and certainly a dramatic entrance. But culture doesn't change overnight, especially when performance is what pays the bills. Tiana turned to him, calm. You think performance justifies abuse? Malcolm smiled faintly. I think shareholders care more about quarterly returns than workplace morale. There was a beat of silence. Tiana didn't flinch. Then it's a good thing, she said evenly, that I happen to care about both. She dismissed the team to begin their day, but Malcolm's words lingered like cigarette smoke. Later that afternoon, a strange thing happened. File that had been signed off were flagged for revision. A senior associate was reassigned to a back-office department, and Tanisha, who had just presented a flawless pitch, was suddenly told by Malcolm that it lacked polish. Something was happening. Subtle, shadowy, Tiana noticed. She pulled up the internal review system. A sudden flood of negative evaluations were being pushed through on employees who had spoken out, employees who had clapped, employees who dared to feel hopeful. It was sabotage. She leaned back in her office chair and sighed. The head had been cut off, but the body was still twitching. That night, she stayed late, alone, reviewing, watching. On one screen, she opened HR records, names, complaints, dismissals that had been processed under Caro's authority, rubber-stamped by Malcolm. On another, she read emails, passive-aggressive jabs disguised as constructive feedback, backdated changes to team rosters, budget reassignments that conveniently hurt Caro's critics. She knew this tactic. Corporate slow bleeding. Gaslighting on a structural level. Make the brave feel like troublemakers. Make the loud ones feel foolish. But she had not come this far to be subtle. The next morning, she called another meeting. This time, it wasn't just a 22nd floor. It was HR legal, a few executives, and Malcolm. She stood in front of a large screen. No blazer again, just calm fire behind her eyes. Let's be clear, she began. I didn't come to Halberton to clean one desk. I came to fix the whole floor. And if the infection runs deeper, we're not afraid of surgery. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Is that supposed to mean something? Tiana didn't respond. Instead, the screen lit up with an anonymized chart. Each dot represented a terminated employee over the past 18 months. Nearly 90% were women. Nearly 70% were black or brown. A hush fell over the room. Statistically, she said, this level of bias doesn't happen by accident. Malcolm scoffed. That's circumstantial. We have performance metrics. We did, she interrupted, clicking to another slide, until I cross-referenced those metrics with your access logs. You manipulated scores, pushed through fabricated reviews. You buried complaints. Malcolm, you didn't just let Caro thrive. You helped him build the cage. He froze. You have no proof, she smiled. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to offer choice. She turned the screen off. You can step down quietly, or we can take this public. Whistleblower coverage. Press. Audit. Malcolm stared at her. For the first time, the slick mask cracked. Checkmate, she added softly. He left the building within an hour. No applause this time. Just a resignation email and a blank face as security walked him out. But Tiana wasn't done. She stood before the remaining staff that afternoon, tired, but steady. Some of you are scared. I know. You've lived in fear so long, you don't remember what fairness feels like. But hear me now. This floor belongs to you again. We rebuild with truth. Or not at all. And for the first time, the entire room clapped. Even the walls seemed to echo it. Weeks passed. The air on the 22nd floor had changed entirely. It was subtle at first. Memos that asked instead of commanded. Meetings that actually listened. Laughter that didn't die the moment a senior exec walked by. Tiana had installed open-door hours with every department. She sat in on brainstorms, praised quietly brilliant interns, and insisted HR rebuild their feedback channels from the ground up. One Friday morning, she walked past Tanisha's desk and paused. You have leadership in you, she said casually. Get ready. Tanisha blinked. For what? Tiana smiled. Your next promotion. For many, the new era felt like a sunrise, but not for everyone. Behind closed doors, in an unused server room, 3 senior staff members sat hunched over printouts. It's all happening too fast, murmured Peter Lang, an older investment consultant who had coasted under Caro's rule. She's making us look obsolete. She is obsolete, snapped Miranda Wells, Director of Client Relations. Too much heart, not enough teeth. That's not how this world works. We're not running a charity. The third man, Kellen, a compliance officer with a suspiciously spotless record despite working under Caro, leaned forward. I've been watching. She thinks because she cleared out the obvious threats, the rest of us fell in line. He smirked. She's wrong. They'd started calling themselves the Keepers. Guardians of the old order. They didn't want chaos. They just didn't want change that didn't serve them. That weekend, their plan began. They didn't strike loudly. No slurs. No yelling. No late-night emails. They did it like poison. Slow, quiet, and precise. Peter accidentally deleted a key training session file. Miranda began rerouting top-tier clients away from new hires and back to legacy staff, claiming stability. Kellen began filing anonymous internal complaints targeting minority staff with vague accusations. Unprofessional tone, poor cultural fit, lax Polish. HR, still transitioning, was overwhelmed. The culture that had begun to bloom now trembled under a second, subtler wave of pressure. And then came the tipping point. A junior team lead named Lex, young, queer, brilliant, broke down during a routine check-in. Tiana had invited Lex for a casual walk-and-talk meeting. I don't get it, Lex said, eyes glassy. 1 minute we're being told we belong. The next, my evaluations tank. People stopped replying to emails. I overheard someone calling me a diversity trophy. Tiana stopped in her tracks. Who said that? Lex hesitated. Does it matter? It's not one person. It's this undertow. Like no matter how high you climb, someone's always pulling the rope back down. Tiana nodded slowly. She had seen this before, in boardrooms, in corporate retreats, in shareholder calls where subtle racism dressed itself in financial jargon. I need your trust, she said softly, because now we go deeper. That evening, Tiana called a private meeting, not with legal, not with PR, but with the silent victims, the quiet heroes who had survived Caro's reign, and were now struggling under invisible chains. Tanisha, Lex, a few others. We're forming a culture task force, she said. Not a committee, not a PR stunt. Real authority, real decisions. You'll report to me directly. I want transparency, bias detection tools, and full access to team analytics. Lex looked stunned. You're serious? I'm always serious about justice, Tiana replied. Over the next week, strange things began to happen on the 22nd floor. This time, For the better, promotion tracks were publicized. Anonymous complaints were now investigated by third-party analysts. And someone started posting short, sharp messages in the break room bulletin board. No name, just a type quote and a pen. Reform doesn't begin with permission. It begins with courage. TJ. At first, the old guard sneered, but then they started getting nervous, because someone was clearly watching them now. One day, Peter tried to override a client transition order and found his credentials had been flagged for review. Miranda sent a private message mocking a new employee's pronouns and was called into HR within the hour with full transcripts. Kellen received a mysterious envelope at his desk. Inside, a printout of every anonymous complaint he had filed, with an AI-generated fingerprint trail tied directly to his login. There was no threat, no note, just the truth. Tiana watched it all unfold, not with vengeance, but with purpose. She hadn't needed to yell. She didn't throw chairs. She had simply built a system too fair to be manipulated, too clear to be corrupted. But she knew they wouldn't stop. Not yet. Not until one of them made a final move. And someone was about to do just that. Because in the server room, the keepers were preparing one last strike, a scheme so bold, so unethical, it could unravel everything she had built, if she didn't catch it in time. It started with a strange error. Late one Thursday night, a team of junior analysts received a confidential file they were never meant to see, an internal acquisition dossier outlining the company's potential merger with a controversial offshore firm, flagged for labor violations and environmental crimes. The file was stamped highly confidential. Within 20 minutes, it had spread across Slack channels, email threads, and even made its way to an industry blog. Panic hit the executive floor like a tidal wave. Someone had deliberately leaked it and framed it as Tiana's initiative. The whispers began immediately. She's selling us out. This was her plan all along. Guess the disguise wasn't just at the start. Tiana sat in her office, staring at the file's metadata. The timestamps were doctored. Her digital signature had been forged. And the leak? It was traced back to her assistant's login, an assistant who had been out sick for 2 days. It was a trap. A desperate, last-ditch effort, and she knew exactly who was behind it. The keepers. While the floor buzzed with suspicion, and while executives above demanded answers, Tiana called an emergency late-night meeting. She gathered her culture task force, Tanisha, Lex, and 3 others, and laid out the evidence, the framing, the betrayal. Then she turned to Tanisha. You've got a background in digital forensics, don't you? Tanisha blinked. Surprised. I do, yeah. Grad school. Tiana smiled. Good, because we're not going to just defend ourselves. We're going to expose them. And we're going to do it by sunrise. What followed was a night of quiet warfare. Tanisha and Lex pored over access logs, comparing IP addresses, decrypting VPN routing used to spoof Tiana's credentials. They found the server room login. They found the unauthorized data pool, and at 3:17 a.m., they cracked the final piece, Kellen's secure backup folder, hidden beneath a dummy subdirectory labeled Q1 Expense Forecasts. Inside, screenshots of strategy sessions discussing the frame job, mock emails drafted to media contacts, even a recorded conversation, Kellen, Peter, and Miranda outlining exactly how they pinned the leak on Tiana. Proof. Undeniable. By 7 a.m., the executive board received a full report. By 7:30, legal was involved. And by 8 a.m., the 3 conspirators were sitting in a glass-walled conference room, silent, pale, and cornered. Tiana entered without ceremony. No guards, no fury, just truth. She placed the printed documents on the table. This, she said, was your final move. Peter opened his mouth, but Miranda grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered. Tiana continued. I've seen 100 versions of you. Polite saboteurs. Smiling villains. But here's the difference now. Your game is done. And this company will never again belong to people like you. Kellen tried to stand, blustering. This will ruin your reputation too. You know, the company, the press. Tiana held up a hand. We own the narrative, because we told the truth first. She turned and walked out. The board terminated all three by noon. But the real moment came at 4 p.m. when she addressed the company. Not from the 42nd floor, not behind a podium, from the center of the open workspace on the 22nd floor. No suit, no tie, just truth. "I came here in disguise," she began, "because if I'd walked in with a title, people would have hidden who they really are. And I needed to see this place, as it is." She looked around the room, at Tanisha, at Lex, at the interns, the veterans, the new hires watching with wide eyes. "What I saw," she said, "was rut and resilience, abuse and brilliance. But what matters most is what we build now." She paused, then added, "Leadership doesn't sit above people. It walks beside them. And if we walk forward together, there's no ceiling we can't break." The applause wasn't explosive. It was steady, honest, from the heart. The company didn't just survive the scandal. It evolved. A year later, Tanisha became director of strategy. Lex was promoted to head of employee experience. And Halberton? It became a case study in leadership reform, praised not just for its profits, but for its people. And as for Tiana, she stepped back quietly 6 months later, not because she was defeated, but because she had done what she came to do. She had walked into a broken system, unrecognized, underestimated, and changed it from the inside. And when she left it better than she found it. So next time you think the intern's too quiet or the new hire's too green, remember, the person you overlook might just be the one holding all the cards. And if you're the one misusing power, well, be careful, because the CEO might be watching.